Excellent. Thanks so much, Rahu, for preparing and being here and sharing with us, some highlights of your journey and how you got here to where you are today. Before I open for questions, I do have a question, but before I open for perhaps questions from the group, I just wanted to say it's quite impressive to see, how you leverage your creativity, your background in engineering, and how you manage to carve, roles across, your career that align with your values. So hats off to you. So that doesn't come for free, it took time and energy and a lot of, dedication to, be today working in that space in a renowned, not-for-profit, being awarded, CIO 50 a couple of years in a row, and be working, I'm assuming, in an area that is very aligned with your values. So good on you. As I said, I have a few questions, but I just want to give opportunity to the others to comment, questions, thoughts, or any insights from what you just heard from Rahu. If anyone has something to, feel free to unmute yourself and share your thoughts. So while people are thinking, I might step in, and I wanted to say, I think for full disclosure, I think Raul mentioned already, and I think it's no secret because he gave me a beautiful testimony on LinkedIn. So we worked for a little while together, and that's how I came, I came across Rahul and got to know him a little bit better. And he's very modest, I can say, very, very modest. And, recently, I don't know how much would that be okay to disclose. I think that's a safe thing to talk about, Rahul. Just talking about your leadership style and the recognition that the opportunities they recently had at Canteen as a result of employee survey, and how your team perceive your leadership style, and the fact that they are working with you, how happy they are working with you, and what are the consequences of that in the organization. So on that note, taking consideration that you're very modest, but what would you, if you had to share a couple of pieces of advice around mindful leadership or leadership style in general, what would you say the trademark of your leadership approach?
So when I think about that, a couple of things come to mind. I think getting the right hire it's super important. So I spend a lot of time talking to people and before moving people into actual interviews. So as an example, the most recent role we hired for a data scientist, we had about 200 applications, and good thing is that a lot of people nowadays are getting more interested in doing roles in the non-for-profit space to feel that what they're doing is more meaningful, and out of that, pretty much anyone who had a profile that was interesting, I spent 10 minutes just giving them a quick call and trying to learn more about who they were as people. So I think with my team, I have a person, one of my colleagues who I work very closely with in my team. Her and I were part of our initial restructure of the team, and we've always said we want to make sure that everyone that comes to the team is not just someone who knows how to do the tasks, but someone who we can really see having a good alignment with the team. And for us, that just looks like someone who's just a nice person in general, who's really passionate about making a difference in the world with their skills. So that means like just really talking to a lot of people and trying to really understand what's at the core of why they want to work with an organization like Canteen, and then regardless of whether they have the skills or not, really starting from that point and building the initial shortlist based on who we were able to feel had a real good connection with the organization and the work we're trying to do. And then once the people are in, just really spending a lot of time. I see it like it's like an employee-centric sort of approach. It's really spending a lot of time trying to understand what motivates each person and trying to give them whatever they need to be able within what's available in terms of resources, obviously, so that they can do their own work and then just trying to get out of their way. So we do something that I call like an open planning process, where each person decides what their goals are for the year to come. I just basically give them like an overview of these are the goals that we want to achieve as an organization, and then they are the ones who decide, okay, this is how I want to contribute toward those goals. And what I've learned throughout my career is that obviously it's you don't always get it right, but slowly sort of you can fine tune, and then I find that just getting people as aligned as possible with what the organization is trying to do just means that you don't have to be on their backs, and they really deliver. So I think we have a team that is both really well high performing, very engaged. So we have the highest engagement scores in the organization, but also a team that just very passionate about the work that they do, and just get things done. And so I know with all the push that organizations are having these days to start bringing people back to the offices, I think I'm not one of the ones interested in getting the people back into the office too quickly. So just being able to prove that you can have a team that has flexibility, that it's engaged, but it also performs really well. It's a good combination of reasons to prove the CEO that yeah, we don't really need to bring people into the office 3 days a week, because we're getting them to do what they need to do, and they're doing it really well.
Thanks, Rahul. Please feel free, anyone, to unmute yourself. Otherwise, I'll just keep going. Maybe one more question before and probably won't have breakout rooms because it's such a small group today. The next question comes to mind, Rahul. It's for those, I think Andrew right now is associated with a not-for-profit. Chris works with university. So those interested in or working in the not-for-profit space, because of your track record of working with a number of non-for-profit over the years, what has been the key learning or key advice would you give to people working in that space? You mentioned constraints. I think that's a reality, around budget and having perhaps some limitations. What are your thoughts around working for not-for-profits, for tech leaders working in that space?
I think what I find is that with really good reason, non-for-profits are very careful with how they spend the money from the supporters. So I find that when I have joined different non-for-profits, and as I mentioned before, it's been usually just applying for a traditional IT role, that in order to be able to move into some of the more innovative stuff, you do really need to go through getting the foundations right first. You really need to keep the lights on before you start moving into what people will think are the cool stuff. So a lot of what I try to do is to slowly start looking at where the expenditure of the tech teams is going to, and what I find in the non-for-profit is because of the way we work, there's a lot of funds that are going into sort of third-party companies like service providers, agencies, and because it's hard to build like a in-house team that's strong enough to look after some of those areas, and depending on your size, it makes complete sense to do it at times. So my strategy has usually been, let's start looking at what are some of the areas where we can bring in-house talent, save costs very quickly, and then start proving that we are reducing costs, we are doing more, we're being more efficient, and then we can actually create the results and start being much more impactful in how data and tech is being used. To give you an example, when I joined the organization, there was a little bit of a challenge with the new CRM that was being built, and there was a number of consultants that were coming in trying to save the project, and so I came in. I said, okay, let's stop all of that. Let's try and bring a couple of in-house people that will be able to help us, and I will work very closely with them. And then we were able to then save the project within about 6 months, but we did it at a lower cost. And then we were able to then bring another person that will then help us do some of the data science, which in the non-for-profit is not very common to have data scientists talent in-house. And then beyond that, then, okay, we're doing all these other things. So we started bringing them data engineering in-house, and then we started slowly looking at all of the different digital assets and start bringing some digital technologies, internal capabilities, while also doing a little bit of team augmentation with offshore resources. But I think that particular part works really well when I found if we're able to create a strong internal teams that then can manage the developers overseas directly, Whereas when you're working with an agency, you sort of you talk to an account manager, then the account manager talks to the tech lead, and the tech lead talks to someone else, and it's like 4 or 5 people before it actually gets to the person that's building the product. But if we are doing some of the build in-house and then doing a little bit of team augmentation, we can also prove very quickly that we're saving costs, we're doing more stuff, and we are now at the point that because we build a very strong team that has capabilities around data intelligence, digital technologies, and IT services. We're also actually offering services to other smaller non-for-profits. So particularly in the sort of $5 to $10 million of revenue per year, we found that for those sort of sizes, it's very hard to bring more tech talent in-house. But if we actually help them with some of the more strategic support, so some of the sort of head of IT, sort of CTO type of advice, they can then maybe bring one person and still try and do something similar, because we're providing them at a low cost some of the strategic advice, and then they can still do some of the implementations internally. So we've been working with some other organizations, and we give them data and tech strategic advice. So it's usually myself and a couple of other team members. And then because I can bring across data scientists or data engineer or some of the other skills, we can also bring them into the conversations, as well as some of the work we've been doing to create a SaaS offering with one of the online communities that has also been helping us prove that we can actually generate income. So we're one of the only teams in the organization that is able to also bring income from a service provision, which has been sort of also proving that if we're investing in talent in-house and we save money from not having to use third-party vendors, we can have a strong team that does good things, but also can generate a bit of income.
Thank you. Well, listening to you, have to move on now, I think, but I was listening to you, Rahul, what came to mind was a comment from Rob James, who was a speaker a few months ago. He former CTO of Qantas and CIO of Vodafone, and he was managing when Vodafone and TPG merged, and how different was the mindset at TPG. Was all done in-house. There was a lot of strong ownership about the systems and solutions, while with Vodafone there was a lot of outsourcing, and dealing with vendors. So very different cultures and mindset in terms of how they went about implementing system solutions. And of course, I guess with not-for-profit, you need to be frugal and very, very budget conscious and creative. I think thanks to your creativity is probably very handy in that space. All right, so I'll just I think I'll bring couple of slides so we can continue the conversation. There is no need to go to breakout room. I just wanted to say quickly, next speaker for the next month will be Semi, who is a former CIO from Bupa. So we're very excited. That will be on the 28th of July, and the topic will be how to build engaged and high-performing teams. And so we'll just keep this, and this is a handout, a slide that I put together, and I sent to, I think everyone has received that on LinkedIn this afternoon. We're just some ideas on conversation started really, in this topic of tech for good. So I actually looked up what's the definition of tech for good, and identified Tech for Good for Australia, identified what are the 17 sustainable development goals from the UN. So out of those 17 sustainable goals that we can see up there, invitations for us to reflect on those 2 questions below. If there is any of those goals or any of those areas in particular, minimum 1 or maximum 3 that are actually dear to your heart, that is relevant to you. And if you have any stories or to share, something that you've done in the past, or perhaps plans or actions that you'd like to take in the future, inspired by those development goals. So open for discussion, and please don't speak all at once. And Rahul, you had your say, so you'll be a listener now. And please, I'm assuming, Rahul, that you can stay with us until 8:30. Yep, excellent, thank you. So any thoughts looking at those, anyone?
Yeah, Nat, and thank you, Rahul, for that presentation. It's fascinating, and I'm trying to kind of connect some of the things you were saying together with this question. probably the one that leaps out for me is number 11, the sustainable cities and communities, because, you know, we live in cities and we live in communities, you know, with a greater or lesser degree of emphasis. And so my approach is to start with, you know, making a contribution to our cities and our communities becoming sustainable and aware, and you know, that bleeds over into other things. And you know, the approach I take to that is both within the work that I do, and I work mostly for non-profits and some what we call profit for purpose, purpose-driven organisations that may also make some money, but you know, that's not really their main purpose, who are focused around any of those things: climate action or affordable and clean energy and sustainable cities and communities. And so the approach I take to addressing, you know, several of those, but let's focus on number 11, is by the combination of the professional work that I do, choosing the employers and then, you know, making a contribution to their direction, and but also through the I was going to say non-professional, but that sounds like it's unprofessional, doesn't it? No, through the non-paid things that I do on the board of Tenants Victoria, and with the community gardening initiatives that I'm involved with. You sort of build a portfolio of things that you feel like you're making a contribution to, but of course the things that you learn from one, you apply to the other. Things that I learn in being an IT advisor and you know, leading teams and organizations for you know, be it Make-A-Wish Foundation, or in this case sustainable salons, you apply to your work in, you know, on the board of a non-profit, and vice versa. You learn governance directions and ideas and contacts, and you know, from one that you apply to the other. So I find these kind of frameworks, those 17, valuable to figure out how you're applying across a whole range of things that I do. But that's some thoughts from me anyway.
Thanks, Andrew. And Chris, you unmuted yourself. I'm assuming that wasn't accidental.
Yeah, I was looking at these and thinking how interesting it was. I couldn't find anything that I shouldn't be interested in. But I thought it's, you know, all of these 17, I divided into whats and hows. And for me, the how ones I focus on, and it's basically how IT works, is number 4 and number 5. Is ensuring that all the people in the organization, as a longtime CIO, my concept is I use technology to build strong IT support organizations, because that's what endures. It's Oracle one year, SAP the next year. Do you know what I mean? Like, tech comes and goes. What remains is the people, if you really made a solid core of people. And for that, partly because I've worked mainly in North America and then in countries, in continents like Africa and Asia and now Central Asia, the whole gender equality thing. I mean, the number of people, and I'm a nonviolent person, but the number of men I've wanted to punch in the head when I've been told over and over again, women can't code. I mean, it makes me foam at the mouth at this point. And I show them all the people, all the women who've made great contributions to IT, largely, you know, in the beginnings of it. And so for me, using all the technology as a way of training people in the countries or the cities or the organizations that I'm in to be well educated and to understand that there's an equality of gender, which doesn't mean that everyone gets treated the same, because men don't have babies and women do have babies. And how do you manage maternity leave? Kazakhstan has 3-year maternity leave. The US had 6-week maternity leave. And I've worked in both environments. How do you make it so that there's a continuity in the organization? And a woman who goes away for 3 years, when she comes back, you know, that's 2 generations in IT. And she went away as a basic Java programmer, and she comes back, and ChatGPT has meant that all of that went away because we've got code generated automatically. So how you manage that And if you do 4 and 5 correctly, it has a way of enabling the rest for me.
Thanks, Chris. Theo, Michael, any thoughts?
I don't have any stories anywhere near as good as those, but so being a Bupa, so we have a very big focus on environment, being a health insurer or healthcare provider, and health and well-being. So every year, so practically, we run what's called ECO-D, which is sustainability. It's like a mini hackathon. Basically, we pick one of the 3 or 4 of these particular sustainable development goals, and we narrow it down to 1, and every year we look for startups in the space that are solving problems using technology, and we end up investing and partnering with them. So I think last year was Canva, which is disposable canvas bags, disposable bags, plastic bags that are made out of a material that you can actually throw away. So it decomposes. So we actually practically look for, because we're such a large organization, that being innovative is interesting.
The rich kid in the block, Phil,
we're
tonight.
sorry?
You're the rich
And
kid
what is-
tonight.
Yeah. So yeah, so we focus on this specifically. So I think this year, I can't remember which one we're focusing on this year, but climate action is front and center. Sustainable cities is something that we also focus on. So we invest as an organization into that. So what do we actually want to achieve? What are the things we want to focus on? And we do that annually as well. So it's front and center in our corporate strategy, actually.
Cool. Thanks, Phil.
Yes, I'm looking at some of these and thinking, I don't think any, even organisations that are focusing on some of these seem to find that they can't perform all of them at a good level, and I think that's a bit of a challenge that we do have to face. Now, I work for a company where we're small, we're not profitable yet, so we're more focused on how do we make sure we survive, but where we can, we do things, we pay attention to things like the good health and well-being side of things for our staff, and for the people we deal with as well. I think we've recently put everyone through mental health first aid Australia training, which is kind of cool. It means that when we do get those customers or staff that are struggling a bit and they say something, we'll pick up on it, we'll have a chat to them, and that's part and parcel of what we do when we deal with anyone. Having sort of said that, though, it's really interesting for me looking at my partner's situation. She works for a charity as a scientist doing medical research, biomedical research, and there, in some ways, I say that I look at that as part of number 3, where they're focusing on the good health. Unfortunately, they fall down on the well-being, and they get a lot of burnout from people, and it's a real, I think, a challenge for a lot of charities there to make sure that they're using that money in a sustainable way for the individual, not just for the organization. So yeah, I guess I look at some of it and think, yeah, does that make the charity work appeal to me? And in that side, it doesn't, but I've also been involved in other aspects of charity work that do appeal to me. So kind of rambling a bit there, I know, but I think there's a few ideas somewhere in my waffling.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark, for sharing. And I might go next, share my 2 cents, and it will be good to hear from Rahul after, everyone share a perspective as well. So I think the one that appeals to me the most is number 3, good health and well-being, but more specifically, mental health. Surprise, surprise, is a very dear topic to me. And the reason why mental health, I think, is so important is because I truly believe that leadership starts in the mind. And I think the causes of most of the issues that humanity, that we are facing in the world are rooted in the mind. If you look at wars, if you look at greed and selfishness, all the issues. Actually, we do, you know, we do have food for everyone on the planet. I mean, that's a classical example, right? What prevents us from actually solving the issue? It's I think the solution is really in our mind. So addressing what we call, you know, in the Buddhist philosophy, the poisons of the mind, which are around selfishness, greed, and other unvirtuous, I think, qualities of the mind. And once we address those and the growing wisdom, I think we could easily solve most of the basic issues that we can see there on the screen. It's a matter of a goodwill. That's my humble, you know, perspective. So that's why I think mental health, and when I say mental health, I'm going beyond just the mental health. I'm talking about developing a compassionate mind, a selfless mind. So that's what I really mean. If that makes any sense, my rambling, Michael, that was my turn. So Chris, you unmuted yourself. You had some.
Yeah, what gets me is how anyone who's not in, I mean, the idea of not-for-profit, and I suppose universities are not-for-profit, but I always find myself wondering, how the hell can anyone afford a technology unit these days? I mean, technology alone could make almost any organization a not-for-profit. Just because our salaries are so high and our costs are so high. I don't understand how Raul manages to do anything. I've worked in universities my entire life, and the IT people are always paid more than the other administrators, more than finance, more than HR. You know, the very senior IT people in universities are paid as much as deans. And CIOs like me are up there in the US, along with football and basketball coaches, you know, in the top 10 paid people in the universities. And there has to be some way that we can take technology and make it so that it's more at the level of Lego than at the level of a high-end jewelry store. And I mean, I don't understand how to deliver high quality IT in a low income organization. And, you know, I've worked in Africa and Asia and Pakistan and Afghanistan. Not a lot of money there, but even so, it's a jarring amount of money that we have to spend on IT to make those hospitals or universities work.
Interesting to me that you say we need to make it more like Lego than sort of the jewelry type of thing. To me, we have done that to a huge degree already. The problem is, the more we make it by Lego, the more complex are the things that we're building, because we can do more with it.
Yeah.
So I think the cost for outcome has massively gone down. Our expectation of what we can do and the outcomes we're seeking have massively gone up.
Yeah.
I look at, I got on the internet in 92 or 93, and I look at where it is now and what it's enabled. And I remember when I ran an internet access provider in 95, and we paid 22 cents per megabyte of data. That was our wholesale rate that we received data at. And I'm like, I would have sent myself broke today just downloading emails if that was still the price that we paid.
Yep.
So yeah, I think we've come a long way, but our expectations have increased. So the cost to benefit is significantly better than it used to be.
I think from
yeah, I think you're right, Michael. Our expectations continue to soar ahead of our, you know, ability and our capacity in so many areas, not just IT, because, you know, our imaginations are soaring ahead of us constantly. I think Raul's idea and approach, even if it's, you know, small to begin with, of sort of consolidating, sort of having, you know, fewer, you know, bigger and more capable organizations offering some of those services on behalf of, you know, a handful or even more smaller non-profit organizations is part of the solution there, because of course we've all got to manage HR, we've all got to manage finance, we've all got to manage relationships with our customers. Sure, everybody is unique, we're all unique, but nevertheless there's some commonality there, and I think your approach of figuring out how to do it well and then saying, well, can I do this for somebody else is, you know, is part of the core, and I don't think that's restricted to IT either. I mean, you know, think of all the tiny non-profits that you have that each have a CEO and an HR department, and you know, all of that drives cost. I think consolidation is on the cards over the next few years, including for IT. But I just draw an interesting parallel. Obviously, you've taken an approach of where you can, you'd rather hire some of your own people and build a core of people who are passionate about what you do and understand what you do, and build technology in-house rather than using external service providers. Well, aren't service providers just people who've done what you just described, only times 10? Now, of course, they're also for-profit organisations, so that, you know, mostly, but there are non-profit service providers who you know, focus on the non-profit sector or the for-purpose sector. And I just wonder how those two things fit together or don't fit together. Raoul, I guess, but anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think what I find is that definitely when you're trying to look at consolidation and as organizations get a little bit more sophisticated with how data and tech are being used, is always hard to continue working with agencies, because agencies are really interested in that big initial contract to build a new shiny thing, but then when you need to then do the small improvements, it's really hard to continue working with them, because those parts are much
smaller than the initial contract that you can work with them on. But then when you're actually consolidating, because what most organizations I've joined, the amount of 3, 4, 5 systems trying to do something very similar in different areas of the org, just being able to do that consolidation also internally just saves a huge amount of money. And nowadays, our operational cost has actually stayed the same, or even a little bit lower than what it was 4 years ago when we had just 4 people in the team. And the cost of the actual team is actually comparable with what we were spending before paying agencies and some of those other fees. So while I agree with Chris that it is expensive to run an in-house team, for me it's always really how we can create a value that can really show that, yeah, it is actually much better because we're delivering better services, we're getting actual insights from the data. Most non-for-profits I've worked with in the past, when I joined, they're really struggling even to just get descriptive analytics going well, just to understand how they're doing, let alone trying to do prescriptive and predictive stuff. It's like years away from being able to do stuff like that. You actually prove, okay, this is how we're generating value from doing better with our data and understanding that actually our systems are all giving us the same information and not like 4 different systems, and each of them is giving us a different value on what we're trying to understand. That's where the value is getting created. And then, as you say as well, we can now share some of that value with other organizations that are also offsetting some of the cost of our in-house team, even though the cost hasn't really increased when we compare it with what the organization was spending before with all of the big project using agencies to being built.
But
That's
are
really
you
interesting.
using
Thank you.
Are you using open source software wherever you can?
We do, everything we do is open source. Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't find that, what I find is when I do it or try to do it, is that basically it's a community activity. And the community as a whole is made up of lots of different groups, each with a different perspective. And the software gets sort of generalized to the point where people say, well, that doesn't work for us anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like I found that in North America, you know, and anytime we tried to do something for presentations in the classrooms and used open source, it started out okay and then became vaguer and vaguer and more complex, so that almost became like a package in terms of complexity.
Yeah, and we do try to sort of stick with some of the big players, not go with open source stuff that is a bit too small that has the risk of not continuing. So we do some of the like the lower complexity stuff. We use things like Drupal or WordPress, and then some of the more complex stuff we do use things like React and Laravel and some of those things. So things that are a little bit more flexible, and that if something goes wrong with the open source, we know we just sort of go back to basics and we can still do the stuff that we need to do, rather than going with some open source that might be too small and we don't know if it's going to continue having a life or not.
One of the things we've found, this is coming from a bit more of a commercial view, but with open source, is make sure that you give back to it. If you need a feature, don't just ask someone else to do it. If you give back to it, not many people do give back to open source. There's a few big projects that become big behemoths, but most of those you can look at the components that are used in them and reuse those components yourself and actually get the bits you need without all of the fluff around it. And generally those components are more like the smaller Lego blocks. You're putting a few bits together and then making them work. So even something I'm pretty sure Drupal I say recently, it was recently in my head, which is probably 5 or 10 years ago now, moved over to using Symfony as the underlying framework for it. So you can very easily go, well, I will use a lot of the componentry in Symfony and provide some support for that and get a very cut down version of Drupal that's more customized to your needs. Do you actually need Drupal is the question there. But yeah, I guess as part of that, I've also found that especially if you start using something, if you find it is drifting away from your need, you fork it, you create your own copy of it, you support that with the cut down version of it. You still save yourself hundreds of thousands of developer hours by using something that someone else has written. And as long as you're clear about the fact that you've forked off from the original and what direction you're taking it in, you'll find that some of those other organizations that are using it will go, actually, we want your version because that's what we're looking for. And they will then help support it, either financially, donating some money to a good cause to help look after it, or by giving time to it.
Yeah.
But you do have to ask. And I think someone like Canteen's actually got a really good bonus there in that you can go, hey, you can donate money to us and write it off on tax. And that might be another developer on the cards.
So this is such a great conversation. I'm conscious that we have 8 minutes left though, and I was just here listening to you and quite surprised, and I just had this realization that this is roundtable number 19, and this is the first time ever that I feel that we are having a technical discussion. And it's definitely not our intention, but I can see the link from Tech for Good and not-for-profits and budget constraints and how we got into that conversation. And clearly, it's a very interesting discussion for all. But I will invite us to maybe press pause. And before I ask, as usual, before we close, I ask each one of you, what has been the one thing, that you're taking away from your precious time, invested 90 minutes to be here and to join the discussion. So what has been the one takeaway, the one thing that you learn, or one reflection, one insight, one thing that you want to investigate further, or perhaps an action that you want to take as a result of these discussion. But before I do that, I want to ask Rahul, put Rahul on the spot, something that wasn't planned. Rahul, for those younger tech leaders listening to this recording, perhaps down the track, and who are really keen to bring some meaning and purpose and interested in working in the non-for-profit space, what would be your one piece of advice if you had to mentor or advise those, other than looking at your history, your own journey, and learning from your approach? What would be the one piece of advice you would give them?
I really think in the non-for-profit, to be a tech leader, you have to learn as many practical skills as you can, because you have to be a jack of lots of trades. that you really need to. I have to be doing lots of little different things every day on top of doing some of the strategic stuff. So as long as you sort of find ways to look for very practical ways to use technology and not trying to be too focused on the one thing, because it will become much harder to get a tech role, and this is like a huge non-for-profit, which there aren't that many of those in Australia particularly. Then I think you'll be able to find an entry point, and then it's totally start looking for more ways to use data and tech to improve what the organization is doing. I think just that practical component is very critical.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Rahul. So with 5 minutes left, I think we have roughly 1 minute for each of us to, share your final thoughts from today's discussion. So who is inspired and ready to go to kick off, if anyone? Your key learnings or thoughts?
Yeah, look,
after today?
I am inspired, Nat. I'm going to revisit this question of is it economical to, in non-profit and for purpose, small, medium enterprises to build their own versus using service providers, and what does that mean for the relationship with our people and the ownership and buy-in that our people have for the work that they do? Because we hire technology people, and sometimes they want to have their hands on their own technology, and I must say that I've usually taken the view that, well, we're just not big enough to be able to have that, because if you have one person, you've really got to have 3 people so they can back each other up, and we just can't sustain that. So, but I'm going to relook at this question and this approach based on what I've heard here tonight, and I'm linking it back to mindfulness, because what's always in my mind is what's going to inspire people to work for us and do fantastic work for themselves and for us and for the purpose, that our constituents as the beneficiaries of the organisations we work for. So this is going to be playing in the back of my mind for a little while.
Thanks, Andrew.
I think, go ahead.
Go for it, Chris.
Go ahead, Michael.
Okay, thank you. I think for me, one of the key takeaways was that NFPs are often they go looking for an IT manager, not realizing that they need someone who's more than just in-house IT management, and not realizing the benefits of it. And I think to a certain degree, in relation to what Andrew was saying, there's the service provider versus, as in an agency, versus software as a service providers, and I kind of view them differently. I think for me, the agencies are very much project based, and it's about time to market. Whereas software as a service is more about time in market. They're running a product and that you pay a subscription for it. I can see insanely large benefits in bringing that agency work in-house, because you suddenly make it more of a product and it's something supportable that you're going to get more value from longer term than just having a short-term project. So I guess part of that just came back to me as one of the things I see as with my involvement in product side of things is the difference between product and project, and seeing that play out for Canteen, I guess, just reinforces that a bit for me.
Yeah, and I guess for me, it is the contamination that I see happening in universities, where you think because we're producing world-class research, medical or physics or whatever, chemical engineering, that somehow all your IT has to be that same level. I mean, let's face it, no one ever got a Nobel Prize for a world-class payroll system. You just need an ordinary payroll system. The dollars are dollars. They're 10
No, but we're special. We have special requirements for a payroll system,
you know
don't
what?
we? We're unique. Don't tell me that we're
The number
ordinary.
of times you hear that is just amazing. And you think, we're really bright in universities, but we're dumbasses when it comes to our institutional egos. that insist that we have to go with Oracle or SAP or what was PeopleSoft or whatever for stuff that is really just normal stuff. Canteen has to pay people. So they've obviously got a way of paying people mechanically. And that's what our payroll system is. And yet we pay these enormous amounts of money. So we don't pull apart. What do we need to be the razor that enables us to make the sharp line for this, the really world-class service we have to give, and compares that to what do we need that's just bread and butter that enables us to run the organization. And they should be two separate streams. And personally, I think, moving to buying transaction software as a service, to me, is the way to go for a lot of these things. They're too similar.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Chris. But there is always for each of us something that we really are. We do need to be special on. You use the term the razor. We've got to be the razor. But
yeah.
So if there's one reason that they do pay the big bucks for strategic IT leaders, it's to help define what that is. Yeah, what do you really need to be special about, and how we're going to do that well, and how we're going to get the right people motivated towards doing that well for us, or for us plus 10 others, or that's the key, I think. And as you say, pay Salesforce or Microsoft or whatever or Xero to do your financials for you.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. With 0 minutes left, I will share my takeaway, if I may, before Rahul. And I think I look at Rahul and I think of I can help to think of the Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, and he shared in his introduction exposure to war zones, growing up in Colombia. And I think I probably relate to that so much because, being South America, Brazilian as well, and having similar issues with narco traffic, impacting society in Brazil, I can relate to that. So, and I think the gift of that upbringing, in such a convoluted environment, I think is this really compassionate heart, this empathy, and the creativity that is so resourceful, especially in the not-for-profit space. So I can help to think of that hero's journey, that going on a journey, bringing the LXC, back to the community. That's something that I think I'm taking away from our overall discussion today. So that was me. And last but not least, Rahul, your final thoughts, over time. Sorry about that. But any final comments from you?
For the invite. I think this chat just reinforces the importance of just getting out of what you do day to day and just hearing a few different perspectives just always enriches your view of whatever you've been thinking throughout the day. But thank you, everyone.
Super welcome.
Thank you.
So again, thanks for your time. A very intimate discussion, very privileged, all of us, to have Rahul here in this small circle. So have a good rest of the evening, and hopefully see you next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.